Marketer of the Day, episode 567. Translate your message into money. Automated webinar funnels, strategy sessions, and serving your audience with Jeremy Slate.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Marketer of the Day podcast. We're chatting with Jeremy Ryan Slate. And if you ever struggled as an entrepreneur, and I think that at some point or another we all have, then you're going to want to sit up and pay very close attention to our interview, because Jeremy is the founder of the Create Your Own Life podcast, which is going to help you to create life on your own terms. And Jeremy specializes in using podcasting and new media to create celebrity. And he was ranked #1 in iTunes New and Noteworthy and number 26 in the business category. So we're going to find out about what Jeremy has going on and how you can help you with podcasting, traffic, getting noticed, and everything that entails. So Jeremy, glad to be talking to you.
Hey, man, I'm stoked to be here hanging out, and I can hope I can add some value to your audience today, man.
Heck yeah. I mean, I think we can do that. So, I mean, maybe just to sort of get a feel for what you have going on. I mean, how has maybe the last 30, 60 days been for you in your business? What is your focus been? What's kind of on your mind? Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I'll tell you what, is we've been concentrating a lot more recently on actually like getting our marketing funnel going. Because the biggest thing that we been working on in the past is we get a lot of leads in through podcasts and we get a lot of leads in other places, but we haven't had like a very well situated way to handle those leads. So we've been working on building a automated webinar funnel, and we actually just launched that a few days ago, and we've had some hiccups and whatnot, but it's actually been going pretty well. And that's really been our main focus right now, is doing that with our business so we can get the sales side of things ramped up a little bit more. And obviously doing a lot of podcast interviews, because, you know, with my show, Create Your Own Life, we're well over 400 interviews at this point in time. So I've gotten to chat with a lot of people.
Well, super cool. And there's something to that, as far as there's like two sides of the coin, right? There's getting new people in, and then once you have people on your site, you have to treat them in a pretty smooth fashion. Like, it's no good to, first of all, have a site where no one knows about it, but then you go and you appear on podcasts, or you do whatever you need to do to get people coming to your site. And then if that in its own is not optimized, then you're going to lose them there as well. And it seems like and no one really seems to talk about this, but it seems like every couple of years you have to maybe throw out the funnel that you created years ago and start fresh to kind of rebuild it. At least that's been kind of my experience. Maybe after 2 or 3 years, the funnel sort of goes bad. Have you experienced this sort of thing?
Well, I don't know if you've seen this recently too, Robert, but the big thing that Google changed is there's no longer autoplay on videos on landing pages if you're using Chrome. So that's been a huge issue for like people opting into webinars and things like that now, and it's actually something we've been combating as well. So we had to redo our funnel, actually, as I said, recently. So it was working in 2017. It was converting quite well, and that's really where things are at now. And you'll find that in any business, one of the big things that'll fix a lot of things in your business is actually bringing more sales in, because as long as you have a great product and you're delivering a great product, if you're bringing more sales in, then you can hire more salespeople to handle those leads, and then you hire more people on the production side to handle, you know, who's getting service. So you'll find that handles a lot of different things in your business.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, get more sales in there and adjust to these monkey wrenches that someone's going to throw at us, right? If it's not Google, it'll be Facebook. If it's not Facebook, it'll be Visa, MasterCard, or, you know, the European Union or the FTC, or just someone's going to throw something at us, right?
Sure. So it's always being able to, I guess, kind of move with that so everything's going in the right direction for you.
Yeah, because, I mean, if you don't move, then your business will stagnate and someone else will pick up the slack, some other business, some other competitor. So to kind of give us an idea of what you set up here, so you you hop on other podcasts and you talk about sort of how to live life on your own terms, and then you send people back to your site. So what sort of site do you send people back to, and what experience do they go through?
Yeah, so well, really what I'm actually talking about, since my agency helps people get booked on podcasts, that's a lot of what I'll end up talking about when I'm on a show. So that's kind of like you get point one in. And then the other thing that we did is our website's actually a one-pager with anchor links. So do you know what I mean by that, like anchor links?
So basically it's a long web page, and then there's navigation, but the navigation, instead of going to different pages, it drops you down to sections on that one page, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I didn't want to get like too technical on you, but that's what an anchor link does. It pulls you to a different place on a page. So it's actually set up in a way that it takes people through the process of what do they need to know, getting closer, either booking a call or hopping on a webinar or whatever it may be, to being closer to that sale. So that's actually how our website's set up. And the webinar funnel is set up in such a way that we're giving them a opt-in that they can get a ton of value from. It's usually a worksheet or a checklist. And in our new version, it's a worksheet, and it actually takes them through the process of, hey, I can actually help you apply this. And that's where the webinar funnel comes into that, and actually brings them then onto a strategy session, which we see go very, very well. I've seen this work with Russ Ruffino for many years, so we've actually copied a lot of what he's done at Clients on Demand.
Okay, great. So you hop on and tell people about how they need to get booked on podcasts, and then that leads to this worksheet, and then that leads to this sort of strategy session.
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of allows everybody involved to realize, if there's somebody that we can help, or if they believe we can help them. And then there's also the bit of it that you have to leave somebody with some sort of value as well. Like, you can't just hop on there and start selling away. You really have to share value with somebody, so if they do walk away with it, they feel like, wow, this guy really helped me. This is great. Okay, yeah, I am ready to work with you.
Okay, well, awesome. And so maybe to sort of back up here and figure out so what people need to know here. So you're all about getting people booked on podcasts. So what's sort of what's the plan here? Is the idea like someone has an existing business and they go and find podcasts that are a good fit, they hop on, they deliver value, that sort of thing?
Well, that's part of it, but there's also, like, you have to make sure, first of all, you're niched down enough. Like, you have to make sure that because a lot of times bigger podcasts may not be the right fit for you. So we find that it's got to be niched down enough into basically whatever your category is, and then you can find that. But then there's also more to it. There's actually the way you appear on that show. We find there's 3 key components to every interview. There's story, message, and call to action. And these 3 things have to line up to actually take people through a process. And every podcast is a little bit different. Like in this interview, for example, we didn't talk much about story, but that's fine. That's how your show works. And you're going to find shows are different. So what happens is you actually have a personal story so people can emotionally connect with you, a message that's then something that's really going to help them and they can walk away with. And then the call to action is actually something that's going to help them apply the message. So in this case, it's our worksheet, which actually takes them through the rest of the funnel. So that's what we find works really, really well. But now there's also more to that, because you can go on a podcast and that's great, but it's also, what are you going to do with that? Because it's that way with any piece of media, Robert, especially like online media, is you have to tell other people about it. So we actually take clients through a lot of the content marketing and email marketing strategies to create more attention for these episodes. So it's kind of good for everybody, because podcasters love more traffic and they love guests that do a great job. And then clients love that they're actually able to create attention that's relevant to the market they're in.
Super great. So it sounds like there's a proven format, a proven structure, and then maybe a few things that if someone is appearing on podcasts, they have to figure it out. They have to get their story down pat and kind of know what their talking points are and know what sorts of things that they're that they're saying and that they're answering. And as far as the whole like story thing, I thought about this a lot. Like I tend to just like to jump into the content first and then kind of feel it out, and then sometimes in the middle I'll kind of sneak in a story. I'll ask about like a case study, or kind of pull things back and then ask about how that person kind of jumped in. But it's like how, like you sort of alluded to there, everyone has their own kind of format, right? So there's like the material you go in with, but then when you're on some show, you're on someone else's turf, then it might go a lot of different ways. So sort of having said that, do you see, or do you come across any sort of like, I guess, fear or uncertainty with your podcast guest clients if they say, okay, well, you're telling me I need to hop on shows, I'm not really sure what they're getting into? Are your clients just ready to go, or do they have some hesitations at first?
Well, I'll say first off, just to what you just said, like one of the biggest things that I tell clients is you have to be willing to serve the audience. You have to be willing to serve in the way that host needs you. So that's really, really important. And honestly, the reason we started taking people through this process is when we first started the business, like almost 3 years ago now. When we first started, we had interviews that weren't going very well on the client side and on the guest side. And we're actually like, well, let's take a look at this and let's see how we can solve this better. And that's actually where we brought the whole story, message, call to action, and coaching part of what we do into it, because it really helps the show to know that they're going to have somebody that's going to show up well, and it helps our reputation so we can do a better job. And then it also helps the client feel like, okay, I feel like I can really do this. Because you'll find as well, I'm sure you've seen this as much as other people, is when you get to the end of the podcast, you say, hey, where can people find you? And somebody says, well, here's my YouTube link, and here's my website link, and here's Twitter, and here's Facebook, and here's everything else. And people can't remember all that. So really what you're actually helping people do is simplify the process, make it feel more natural, and direct all the attention in one place. So that's really what we found with a lot of our clients, is because we're taking that level of responsibility of what they're doing, they feel a lot better about the process.
Okay, great. And I mean, there was a little bit of a story in there right there, right? It was that that at first things weren't going super great. You had to debug the system a little bit and give them this little bit of a structure, so that way. And it sounds like it's kind of like you put a lot of the confidence in the structure itself, because it sounds like if you try to just go into it without any sort of plan at all, then that puts a lot of the pressure on you, and it might go a lot of different ways, and it just seems like a lot scarier, as opposed to trusting the system and saying, okay, well, I've already prepped with my story and my message and my call to action. And then it sounds also that it's really important to have that call to action at the end really down pat, where if you don't have that, at least if you don't know where things are headed to, then you might be a little bit of a deer in headlights, and you might just throw out so many things where it's confusing, or there might be that low confidence where people say, well, I know I delivered stuff, but I don't know if I should really plug this offer, or if I should really plug this free gift really, really hard, because I maybe don't feel I deserve it.
Well, and there's also two sides to that too, Robert, and there's like, it allows us to feel better about it, but also in our like vetting process of who we're going to work with, it shows us if they're not willing to go through that process, then they may not be somebody that we can actually help, because the person has to be willing to, I guess, learn and be a little bit humble in some ways where it's going to work. Where I had a call with somebody once, and I'll leave their name out of it, but I said, okay, so what's the best website for you? Where do you want to send people? He goes, oh, just Google me. And the funny thing is like, if you can't help them to take responsibility for what's going to occur after that, then why would you even want to do take them on as a client? So it really helps you in two ways, where you're actually able to weed out the people you don't want to work with in some ways, and it actually helps you to take more responsibility for what happens on a lot of those interviews.
Okay, so there's a few things that I'm hearing there. One is that, I mean, maybe people don't even know of a better way of doing things, right? Someone says, just Google me. It's not that hard to park an $8 domain, even if you have to add a keyword at the end or make it something a little unique. That way it's 100% clear on what that is. And then something else that I'm hearing from what you're saying there is that it seems like an ideal client fit for you is someone who is at least somewhat self-aware and somewhat willing to change and open to maybe refining the system a little bit if they just kind of are stubborn and stuck in their ways, and they say, just Google me, or I don't want to mold myself into something that is a kind of a smoother transaction for podcast guesting, then they're not a good fit. But if they want to maybe keep their same greatness, their same genius, their same content, but put a little better icing on the cake, then that can work. That's something you can mold, right?
No, that's absolutely true, because the thing is then I can actually feel good about it. I can feel like they're going to get the results that I'm telling them they're going to get. And the best clients I've had are the ones that do every single part of the process that we ask them to do before they go on a show, because then they're going to have a great experience. And that's really what it's all about, because it is telling the way somebody communicates. Because like I just mentioned, another guy that said, Google me. You dig a little deeper about that, and you find out, well, does he not know, or is he just kind of being a jerk? And I found out later on, it wasn't that he didn't just know, and that's really what it allows you to find out by that process.
Okay, well, great. And so whenever this whole topic of, like, as you know, there are a lot of different services that help people get on podcasts. Whenever I I explain to someone that these services such as yours exist, there's usually like some hangups about it, and I assume that you've heard these similar hangups. People say things like, well, can't I just figure out my talk on my own? Can't I figure out my one sheet on my own? Can't I put out these feelers and develop these relationships and put in all the legwork and get booked on all these shows on my own? So having said all that stuff, I mean, of course people can do all this extra crazy work on their own, but why would they want to go with someone like you as opposed to fumbling around in the dark by themselves?
Well, there's two parts to that, and it's funny because we developed a course earlier this year to serve that audience that wants to do it themselves, so we can help educate them. So that's actually how we handled the first problem. But also there's the idea of when you're hiring a firm, it's number one because you're busy as anything and you don't want to do it yourself, and you just want to hire an expert to do it. So really, it's a huge time saver. And, because at this point, I think there's almost 500,000 podcasts out there, Robert. Like, you can dig around and try and find the right ones for you. But, like, if you're a busy executive that doesn't have a team that knows the podcasting space, it's a waste of your time. And it's funny because the piece of feedback I got from one of our clients where they actually said to me recently, they're like, we love working with you because you find the right shows and all that. But you know what a side benefit is? If we're getting a no, we don't know about it. We only hear about the yeses. So I like to see it also that I'm a little bit of positive energy in their day as well.
Nice. They don't have to deal with all the negativity. They don't have to deal with 19 no's and 1 yes. They just see all the yeses.
Right.
So something that I've been looking to maybe tap into more or take better notice of is sometimes I have a podcast guest and it's a really slick process. It's a really smooth transaction. Like sometimes it's just the person who comes, the booking agent is just really nice, and I know that I'm going to say, yeah, I'd love to have them on the show. Sometimes the guest shoots the book in the physical mail to me a few weeks ahead of time, so I have time to read it. I had a guest on a few weeks ago who sent some send-out cards, brownies, with a custom card afterwards. So nice. I mean, yeah, just like things that are really easy to do, but we all forget to do those small little touches. So do you have any, I don't know, any advice on that front, or anything that maybe you wish more podcast guests or even more podcast hosts on either side, just what are just some like easy, nice touches that we could all do to make this whole process easier?
Well, I guess there's a couple things, because I know even just as a podcaster myself, one of the big things we always want is traffic. So first and foremost, I would say if you're going on a podcast, please share it, because you'll have a lot of guests on and they don't do anything with it. And it's like, it's beyond me that somebody would want to spend their time to do an interview and then not promote it. So that would be the first thing, first and foremost, because a lot of guests miss the boat there on promoting it. And, we live and die by the ears that hear us. So that's kind of the first thing. The second thing that we've done with a lot of authors that have worked with us is don't just send a book. Send an autograph book and see what other things in terms of like a gift package you can almost send. And that's gone very, very well for a lot of our authors. But it's really giving people the attention they deserve. And the thing that you'd be surprised about, Robert, is the power of a handwritten thank you card. We've had clients that have sent handwritten thank you cards to hosts, and it's just amazing because it's just something that doesn't happen anymore. So when you get it, you're like, wow, this person actually cares and they're legit. So those are a few things I would really, really look at. Is you want to look at the things that can't be easily duplicated and that can't really be farmed out, because it actually shows that you're taking the time to care.
Yeah, I love it. And as far as that handwritten thank you card, you're making me think of, I had a podcast guest a couple of months ago who sent me a handwritten thank you card, but not just 1 or 2 sentences. It was like all this personalized stuff all the way down the card. And she sent me a really slick water bottle. I don't like one of those like metal ones. I don't even know how much it costs, but just like, there you go, as far as things not easily duplicated. And then another interesting tweak there is that whole like the promise to send traffic, right? Like, not only will I hop on your show, but I'll tweet it X number of times, I'll post it to my Facebook following, I'll send it to my email list, something just really that can easily be added to the template. But I mean, we forget to do it, and we sometimes don't even know to do it. And you're making me think of like I interviewed a guy a few weeks ago who did audiobooks on Audible, and that's the kind of situation where you have to audition to narrate someone's book, and you might be competing against hundreds of other people. But then he said that what helped is, he said, well, not only will I narrate your book, but I'll also promote this book on Twitter, and here's all the things I'll do as far as the marketing juice. So a different thing, but kind of a similar idea here of when you're trying to find the right fit, you're trying to compete against lots of people, add the whatever your extra marketing leverage legwork right there in addition to your appearance, just to stand out a tiny bit.
No, that's absolutely the case, because you have to be able to send traffic. Because I know first and foremost, because there's just so many people that just go on shows and then just forget about the interview they were on. And I don't know, it's almost like disrespectful as your time as a host, because you're taking the time to interview them. You know, you're putting whatever production money and stuff you have behind it. And then just as a basic thing, like, you want more people to hear about you. Like, don't the people who already know you want more people to know about you? And that's what you really have to think about, is you're really like getting rid of your power center when you don't do that.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, I think that we're all lacking in that regard, and I think that we all need that little bit of a reminder to maybe go back and either do a Google search or go back in our email or whatever and look at our previous guest appearances wherever, and maybe load those up into the autoresponder sequence, load those up into the Twitter queue, post them on Facebook, just something, promote those other places where we've appeared, because it helps us as well, right? Because not only are we helping out that host of that show, but we were there and had that extra content, so it's just one more kind of authority validation there, one more place where people can hear about us, and it's something different than just, here's my blog post, here's my webpage, here's my stuff, here's me on someone else's show there. So that's a really good reminder there. And so something else that seems to come to my mind and seems to be like another one of those hangups as far as this podcast guest appearance stuff is, you know, you mentioned early on that it's better to find that right fit show, right? Instead of going on a huge, crazy podcast like a Tim Ferriss show or something, go on something that, go on maybe more shows that are smaller. But then it seems like, I don't know, sometimes I get hung up on this whole all or nothing thing, right? I think, well, if I was just on one little podcast, is that really going to make much difference? And then I think to myself, well, I have to be on like 10 podcasts a day for it to add up to a lot. But then I tell myself, oh, that'll be a lot of work. So do you encounter somewhat of that kind of similar self-defeatism, that kind of all or nothing hang up?
Sometimes we encounter it with a guest, with a client, but we usually are able to talk them through that process. I've never really had that viewpoint, because I think at this time I've been on like 150 or 160 different podcasts. So I really care about, you know, the size of the audience not being that big. Like, I've been on a couple big shows and it was great, but it wasn't the same as actually the smaller shows I was on, because they were actually people that cared about my message and had a lot to do with it. And if you look at it comparatively, well, let's say like radio, right? Like if you're looking at radio, you could get, you know, hundreds of thousands or even millions of listens, but are they people that actually care about you and are actually engaged in what you're doing? Whereas you're listening to a podcast, even if it's a smaller audience, they care a lot about that host who's probably a micro influencer to them. So because of that, they're making decisions of, I'm going to download the show, I'm going to press play on the show, and even if it's maybe not interesting enough right off the bat, because I have faith in this host, I'm going to stick around and keep listening. So because of that, there's a lot to do with engagement. I know even with Apple's beta stats coming out recently, they actually found a lot of the longer shows are doing better, which is surprising to me. People are sticking around for about 80% of shows that are, you know, 45 minutes or more. So it has a lot to do then with people actually being able to be engaged in your message.
Super cool. And yeah, and you always hear about, there's like those stats of like there's that small, or not even small percentage. There's like, I think 60-something% of your listeners will listen to every single episode of a podcast show. And then also, you mentioned like radio and things like that. And I mean, stuff like, you know, radio or a speaking gig, it seems sort of flash in the pan. compared to podcasting, right? You hop on the radio show, and like you said, not only is it a super wide audience, but then once that segment's over with on the local radio station or on NPR or something, that's it. There's not really much going back to that. But then on a podcast, I mean, that's around forever. It gets picked up on iTunes, in the Google searches. And then also, you mentioned there about how sometimes those big shows aren't necessarily all they're necessarily cracked up to be. You probably noticed this too. Like, even when I have like the big, huge celebrity sort of guests, I mean, sometimes the unknowns or the rising stars are more fun than some of these bigger guests. I mean, nothing against, someone who has all this name recognition, but I don't know if it's that some of these kind of up-and-comers are more hungry or more open to the improvisation. But, I mean, there's something, like you said, there's something to be said about the small shows, but then also from the podcast host side of things, there's something to be said about some of these smaller guests, too.
Well, and it's funny you say that too, because you could look at like any of these big names, like let's say like a Grant Cardone or a Tony Robbins or any of these guys, like they could go, hey, I was on these 20 podcasts this week, and eventually their audience is kind of going to get tired of hearing that. So it can be difficult when it's a bigger guest. But like it's funny because my actually number 2 most listened to episode is a guy that I was the first podcast he was ever on, didn't even have a website. But he told everybody and his grandmother about it, and so it went crazy in terms of traffic. So there's that, and there's also they're much more willing to share it with people because like, oh my gosh, I was featured in this podcast. How cool is that? And especially for people that don't even really know what a podcast is, they're like, wow, that's awesome. You're featured on this like new piece of technology, and it's kind of a big deal to people as well.
Right. If you were their biggest appearance, then they might like really put out a lot of extra time and effort to promote that, whereas let's say like a Grant Cardone, if he was on 20 shows this week, there's no way he's going to have time to promote all that stuff.
Yeah, no, it's so true, and I was lucky enough that Grant actually promoted the interview I did with him. I guess maybe it was a slow week or something, but it does have a lot to do with what's going on because their content calendars, if you can imagine, they probably have months filled out in advance that they can't think about putting out another tweet or another post or whatever it is in the middle of that.
Right, but I mean, that's not necessarily a bad thing. That just means that we go and find a path of least resistance. We find some other place to appear on. And so I don't know if this is a loaded question or not, but as far as, the amounts of appearances someone should make, is there like a healthy, I don't know, regularity to this podcast guesting? Is it a good idea for everyone out there to be on at least one podcast a month or at least one podcast a week? Or is that just a silly question? It just depends on what their needs are.
Well, I would say it does depend on what the needs are, but I always lean towards, more frequency if you can, because the thing you have to understand is the internet space is so massive and the number of podcasts that are out there is massive. So you really need to up your chances of getting seen. So I don't know if one podcast a month cuts it. I'm usually going on 1 to 2 a week myself, which I feel like that is pretty healthy and a pretty good way to do it. So honestly, if I had to give any sort of advice, I would be saying that. Like if you can fit in 1 to 2 a week, it's going to be a great thing just because there's so much space on the internet and there's so many ears out there. So you really need to be giving yourself a bigger chance of getting seen. You can't just go on 1 or 2 shows and say, all right, cool. Where's my listeners? Where's my followers? It really has to be something you're continually doing over time. You can't just quit.
I love it. So don't just let this happen to you. Actually go out and kill the lion and drag the meat home and go for it.
I love that.
I mean, and so having said that, so everyone should strive to be on 1 to 2 shows per week if possible. And do you have any advice as far as the time management and motivation aspect of that? Is it just a matter of just get over it and do it, or put time in the calendar? Or what would you say to someone who says, oh, I don't know if I can find time with all the busy things I have going on. I don't know if I can like find the energy or the time to hop on 1 or 2 shows a week.
Well, I would say first off, make time, but I feel like it's tough to set time aside just because podcasters all record at different times. Like for my show, I only record an interview every other Friday. I do like 8 interviews in a row. So like people have to be available on Fridays in order to do that with me. So it's tougher to put the time aside, but I would say really concentrate on making that a habit. But it's really tough to say, all right, well, here's my 2 hours of podcasting, because it also has to fit in the time that a host has available. So I would say if you can fit the flexibility in, and then you have a few open slots a week, fit it in there. But get your team to help you with it. That's why a lot of people have teams, because it's tough to do a lot of this stuff as a solopreneur. But if you have help, man, that's how you get it done.
I love it. Great advice. So build up that habit and then have that team so that you're not just going it alone. And so you have this Create Your Own Life podcast, and you have this Command Your Brand service. So, I mean, tell me about it. So why the heck should people be using you to get themselves booked on your podcast, and how can people jump in on it right now today?
Absolutely. So, the reason they should do it is, first of all, my co-founder Brielle has been in the PR space for about 10 years, and I've done, at this point in time, I'm trying to do math in my head here, I think 425, 430 podcast interviews. So we have a really interesting meld of, the things you should know from a PR standpoint, but also like what makes a really good interview. So we really, like I said, guide people through that process. But then we also find the right shows for them, manage their calendar and a lot of those things. So if you're super busy, it's awesome to have somebody managing that for you. And if somebody's like, hey, I'm hearing this, I'm interested, I want to learn a little more. Well, we actually put together an awesome worksheet for them that can actually help them figure out a lot of the things they need to get moving on podcasting, whether it be themselves or doing it with us over at commandyourbrand.media/checklist. And that was something that would really help them not only to learn a little bit more, but also to, just have a tool so they can start getting themselves on podcasts today.
Super awesome. So commandyourbrand.media/checklist to figure out what you need to know to begin tapping into this whole podcasting interview thing. And maybe not even to begin tapping onto it. Maybe you've jumped in a little bit and you just found yourself overwhelmed trying to go it alone, and you need a better system. You need a better team to handle it. That way you're not so freaking busy. That way you can focus on your own greatness. And that way you can focus on getting the message out and working on the book, working on the website, working on the product, the SaaS service, whatever it is. And that way you're not just chasing all these different connections. And like you mentioned in there a little bit, Jeremy, you don't have to deal with the bad side of it, right? You don't have to deal with the negativity of people not replying or having to follow up, or people saying no and things like that. And I don't know if this is too much of a loaded question, but what's sort of the price range? What can people expect to pay for this sort of service?
It's cheaper than if you hired a PR firm for a monthly retainer to be able to get on like anywhere from 10 to 24 different podcasts. So if you understand a bit about the PR world, we're a lot cheaper than that, and we're really going to help people to get there. So that's, I guess, the best way to put it.
All right, fair enough. Yeah, we don't want to lock things down to one price range, and then people will say, oh, that's too cheap or that's too expensive. So it's best to go to commandyourbrand.media/checklist and figure out the things that you need to know, the opportunities that are in front of you. And then I imagine, Jeremy, that once people grab that checklist, is there some place to move things forward? Like they'll get on your list, there's links in that resource there, so that way if they're ready to get rocking and rolling with podcast guesting without the headache, then they can move forward with you, right?
Well, it's actually going to give them the option to take an awesome free training I put together for them called How to Translate Your Message into Money, because that's the biggest thing people don't understand is how to actually translate what they have in their brain to how a podcast needs to take it. So I'm actually going to walk them through the 3 key components to be able to do that. And if they get to the end of that and they say, wow, this is awesome, help me, then they'll have the ability to do that.
Super cool. So why make it hard on yourself? Go with Jeremy and go with a team that knows what they're doing, that knows how to get things streamlined for you, to get things PR friendly. That way you can translate that message into money. So the place to go, like Jeremy said, we don't like to load you up with a lot of different links. There's just one place to go so you have that clarity. That's commandyourbrand.media/checklist. So we'll see you there. Go there right now. That's commandyourbrand.media/checklist. And thanks so much, Jeremy, for coming on and sharing your story and just loading us up with all those little things that we need to know in order to stop farting around and stop waiting around and actually, go out there and make some money, get some traffic, get some sales, help people. It's what it's all about. So I appreciate it.
Absolutely, Robert. I really appreciate your having me, and I really hope that I was able to help your audience move forward on something today, man.
Awesome. You were. Thank you. Want to listen to more fantastic Marketers of the Day? Subscribe to us at marketeroftheday.com/iTunes and browse past episodes at marketeroftheday.com.